som geolog I oljebransjen. Han var med på å lete etter olje I Asia og I Midtøsten, og han fikk deler av sin forskning finansiert av BP og Shell. Men så skjedde det noe. Han hoppet av, tok med seg all kunnskapen og erfaringen sin til Greenpeace. Siden da så har han blitt en av verdens ledende eksperter på klimaendringer. I 1997 etablerte han det som har blitt Storbritannias største solenergiselskap, Solarcentury. Og han er også grunnlegger av verdens første private kapitalfond for fornybar energi. Tidligere I dag så postet han på Twitter: "The only times I've ever seen 700 people gathered to talk about energy before was at oil and gas conferences." Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Jeremy Leggett.
So my brief this morning is to talk about this question: can we expect a renewables revolution to emerge from the current situation in energy markets? I'm going to go through a number of risk debates in the energy scene, which I think are very relevant to the answer to the question. Do a quick analysis, can't be more than quick in a short talk like this. Explain why it seems to me there's a regrettable situation that you can describe as civil war in the energy markets, and then look at the prospects. So my main point, in case I run out of time, is that there can be a revolution in this family of technologies that you see depicted on the right-hand side of the slide. Can, not will. Major systemic risk issues act in different ways to accelerate the revolution and to hold it back, and this is what I'm going to try and describe for you. How those risk narratives play out and interact will determine the ultimate outcome, and much depends on this, as we've heard already in the first talk this morning, just with climate change, but with other problems that we have. So the risk debates, and I think it's vital to be aware, all of us are, we read the newspapers, that we live in an era where we know that collectively we can get major risk issues catastrophically wrong. If the credit crunch and the financial crash of 2008 have taught us anything, it's that. And there are two narratives about what is going to happen in the future. One narrative says we haven't fixed this problem. Even the Financial Times runs a series, Capitalism in Crisis. But many people, particularly in the financial services industry, assure us that capitalism is cyclical, it's regrettable, but we're essentially slowly improving the situation and it can't happen again. Much depends on that risk debate. Climate change we've heard about. We've seen how compelling the evidence is this morning, but significant proportions of populations, particularly in America, much prefer to believe the comforting alternative risk analysis that says it's all some kind of conspiracy by climate scientists. A much less talked about debate, which a number of companies are worried about in England, is the oil depletion debate. And again, here we get two very different narratives. One from the incumbency that says oil supply can keep growing globally and meet any kind of projections of demand. Another narrative that says, you know what, maybe these people are telling us a narrative that is as incorrect as the one we were told by investment bankers in 2006. And meanwhile, as we look at all this, a new debate that's emerging is what are the implications for stock exchanges and for the carbon weighting of companies? We allow these companies to build up on their balance sheets assets measured in coal, oil and gas, which may be at risk of impairment and even of stranding. And this is a new debate that the Carbon Tracker organization, a group of financial analysts in the UK that I'm privileged to be chairman of, have recently introduced. And finally, we hear so much about shale gas and shale oil, and the industry uses the term game changer. But you know, we live in an era where we should be suspicious. Is it a game changer? And could it even be another one of these bubbles that we seem so good collectively at creating? All of this will play out to the benefit or detriment of renewables. And I was on a panel at the Financial Times Global Energy Leaders Summit recently in London, where senior executives from Exxon, from the coal industry, and from BP, or Tony Hayward, who used to be the chief executive of BP, argued, yes, we are heading, despite everything we know, into a new era of fossil fuels. They didn't even mention climate change in any of their talks. And you can see this video on the Financial Times website. This is the issue we have with the energy incumbency. So very quickly, let me run through. Now, much of the information I'll show here, I've summarized on a website that was designed for me by the young people at Solarcentury. There's a lot more information on this, so forgive me for going very quickly just through this debate. First, the financial crash. Many people tell us from high places that it's as bad as it ever was in 2007 before the credit crunch. The IMF says this. The structure of the financial sector has not been regulated enough or changed enough systemically to take away the risk. The Bank of England says this. The gentleman on the right is in charge of the Financial Stability Committee, which is responsible for the stability of the capital markets from London. And these are just two of the players who are telling us that this risk could end up in another crash soon. This, of course, will have a profound outcome, not just on renewables, but everything else. The climate crash risk, I won't dwell on this, but I want to make the point that we have had to wait a long time between the fourth and the fifth assessments of all the scientific experts in the world, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. The last report in 2007 was important, but the next one, we are told by the former chair of the climate negotiations, Yves de Boer, will scare the wits out of everyone and will galvanize governments into action. It's due out towards the end of this year. Let's hope it does galvanize governments into action, but we need to be aware that exactly the same thing was said about the 2007 report. Meanwhile, as you go through the recent discoveries that come out, this is from my log, just taken randomly, climate change already wiping 1.6% off GDP, according to a big study. The really depressing evidence from the Arctic, from the Scott Polar Institute, saying the whole ice cap will collapse in 4 years. The US National Center for Atmospheric Research saying among the many climate models, the ones with the highest projected temperatures are the best at replicating the real data. So all this is depressing. And many of us, what we fear is the feedbacks. And these are methane hydrates, if you haven't seen a picture of one before, at risk of destabilization across the Arctic. The oil depletion risk, the companies in our UK industry task force on oil depletion, which I convened but was chaired first by Virgin and then by Arup, and here are the chief executives and chairman. We hope we're wrong, but we believe the oil and gas industry globally is being, let's be polite about this, over-enthusiastic about its asset assessment. We think there's going to be a descent, maybe even a collapse in global oil production, despite everything they say about shale oil. By 2015 at the latest, it will be as bad as the credit crunch if we're correct, and we urge governments not to let the oil crunch catch us out the way the credit crunch did. We have some time. This is the final diagram from our report. You can see the descent that we plot based on reported mega projects of oil, and this would give the world the third great oil crisis and really galvanize thinking, if we're correct. What we worry about particularly is consumption and the way the oil and gas producing countries have soaring consumption. This is Dubai in 1990. Have a look at these flats. This is the same scene. There are the flats again in 2007, and you get the point. This is very oil intensive, and this is possibly one of the most scary diagrams that we've seen in the last few months. This is oil consumption domestically in Saudi Arabia. This is their production. If they can maintain it at current levels of about 10 million barrels a day, this is what happens to exports. If this is correct, and this is Citi from September, Saudi Arabia will have no oil at all for export before 2030. Now, that would be rather inconvenient for the world. And the Saudis know this and are talking about massive renewable programs, particularly in solar. Let me emphasize, there are no black swans assumed here. We assume that the oil industry is correct in its bullish assessment of how it can operate without disasters in the Arctic and the deep ocean. For the carbon bubble, you see the arithmetic. This is the budget of 2 degrees Celsius, 565 billion tons of carbon in that budget. In proved reserves alone, there is fully nearly 2,800 billion tons of carbon. And you see, of course, that oil and gas companies are adding all the time resources to reserves, allowed to do so by regulators, by accountants, right across the financial sector, as though those assets are at zero risk of impairment. We think they are at risk of impairment. Many people also think that the shale gas phenomenon, the shale gas boom in America, is another bubble. And the reason for this is that the drilling rates, the production rates, drop off very quickly in these shale fields. So in order to keep the production levels up, a lot of money has to be borrowed, and that debt has to be serviced, of course, from cash flows from the sales of gas. And the price of gas is really low because so many people are doing this. So this has many of the elements of a Ponzi scheme. And this has been reported a bit in the Financial Times, a bit in the New York Times. Could be another bubble. There is risk of that. I don't know that it is another bubble, but certainly there is risk in the equation. And even if it isn't a bubble, is it exportable? Many governments are assuming that this narrative from America can be transported out into the world. And this is recent reportage in December from the Wall Street Journal, long article, that summarizes the many reasons to believe that it's not exportable. Water problems in China, the actual quality of the shale in Poland, on and on. Meanwhile, I think governments, including the British, have swallowed this narrative and gone for gas. This is the very next day in the Financial Times, Chancellor backs gas to fire up Britain. And this is one of our problems in getting renewables deployed. Is this going to be allowable? Is Britain going to prove to be like Texas? We have our doubts. But this is why there's a civil war in energy markets. Last year, a correspondence was leaked from the Treasury to the Department of Energy saying that basically gas investors would be put off unless renewables were actively suppressed. And so this is the kind of battle of ideas that goes on in governments. I'm only going to talk about the British example, but if I had German colleagues here, they would talk about the same kind of thing. Up to 50 big energy lobbyists are deployed in the Department of Energy. Shell, for example, runs 2-day courses for senior civil servants on their view of the future, and that is gas and fracking and unconventional oil, the tar sands. No opportunity for the renewables industry to do the same kind of thing. And at a personal level, I've been active in this area for a long time now. I know lots of people inside government and civil service. I'm told that gas lobbyists behind closed doors lobby to kill renewables, not to coexist with renewables, as you would think would be sensible. Gas and renewables actually go very well together, and nobody here needs reminding of that. But their message is, this gas is going to be so cheap and so plentiful, you don't need these renewables, and they will hold things back. And so you see things in the press like this, the myth that the rising energy prices, the rising price of gas in Britain has to do with the cost of green measures. This is just a myth, and yet it's pushed on the front pages of the tabloid press. Every time the wind industry has a slight problem, it gets onto the front page of the Daily Mail and other tabloids. So against this, we have the driver of climate change. What are our prospects of getting off this road to 6 degrees that you see on the left, to this general road? We can argue about what it looks like, but everyone here knows the broad characteristics of that road. There are 50 families of clean energy technologies that excite venture capitalists in Silicon Valley, and all of them potentially can contribute. It's not just about electricity and heating, it's about motive power, of course, and the use of electricity in the transport system, and of biofuels, biomass, biogas. And so we in the renewables industry do talk about being able to run modern economies 100% on renewables. And not just the renewables industry. This is the gentleman who, the senior prince from Saudi Arabia, who said recently in a speech, he hopes the kingdom will go to 100% renewables in his lifetime. He's 67 years old. Now, of course, this is not because the Saudi government wants to tackle the problem of climate change. It's because they want to have enough oil to export to get the revenue for the exchequer. But you can't say this unless there is some credibility behind it. And of course, it's to Germany, as well as China, as Thomas said, but Germany where we go for evidence of this. Nearly 55% of the land area of Germany now has regions with declared energy autonomy targets, intentions and processes. And the Germans have shown with their growing body of renewables what can be done if renewables are hooked up in harness and run to operate a modern economy. They've done it in the Combi Kraftwerk experiment at 1/10,000th of the real demand using real output of photovoltaics and wind, 78% of the mix, back up with biogas generators, 70%, only minimal storage. And of course, in a real world, in 10 years from now or whenever, there will be other renewables contributing to the mix. There will be advances in storage that aren't available today, but surely will be. Just talk to GE, for example, about their excitement about storage. So this is one of the reasons why we're bullish, and there are other examples of how the emerging record of renewables can be used to formulate this different view of the future. And Thomas showed some fantastic statistics here, but here's another one. Many people don't realize that renewables being added at the moment in 2011 are almost as much globally as fossil fuel capacity. And of course, we're coming from a very low starting point. But with these kinds of growth rates, this is the solar photovoltaic growth rates, but some of the other growth rates of renewables in here, you know, we're getting there. We're a long way behind, but these growth rates, when projected, do very well. And despite the fight back by the incumbency and the myth-making of the incumbency in defending its vested interests, look at how the capital flows into renewables. Last year, more than a $250 billion was invested in renewables. Almost 50% of it went into solar photovoltaics. One member of the family. See how that has grown despite all the problems, all the low stock prices, everything else. It still marches on. So we have reason for enthusiasm. McKinsey, the consultancy, led by a team of people led by a Norwegian, did a study in 2012. If you don't know it, I recommend it to you, Solar Power Darkest Before the Dawn. Interesting title. 1,000 gigawatts of economic solar PV by 2020. If this happened, it would change the face of the energy industry, they say. And working on the front lines, as I do, my company does solar roofing products and solar buildings. This is one such. We have no difficulty believing what can be done. This is a low-income housing development. These are solar electric roof tiles of ours that provide all the electricity for this dwelling, well in excess of what is required, plenty left over to charge the battery car that is used by the citizens who live there. And all the heating is also done on site here. It's a zero emissions development by any one of 4 renewable energy technologies. So 50% of the carbon emissions come from buildings in a country like Britain. And we know we can do this, and we can perform well in retrofit as well, especially with industrial buildings. These are all Solarcentury installations. This is the largest solar bridge in the world, which is in London. And of course, if cloudy countries like Germany and Britain can do this kind of thing, then just imagine what can be done in the Sun Belt. We can contribute even in Britain at utility scale now. There are a lot of 5 megawatt plants. These are all Solarcentury plants. I wish they were all on brownfield sites, but actually we are building some greenfield sites. That's not the best use of solar. And of course in the Sun Belt here, one of our installations in Italy. And so that financing is going to continue. I think it's going to morph in front of the kind of pressures we're going to see in society. There's more and more people power being exercised in the world because of digital media, and the realization, I think, that people have increasingly that governments generally are doing such a bad job because of the problems, the extent of the problems in dealing with people's problems. So watch the growth of crowdfunding. This is going to be really interesting to see how it intersects with renewables. Solar Mosaic and some of these crowdfunding organizations will see new types of financing deployed to push this community-based, decentralized, renewable future. But conventional finance as well, we've benefited relatively little from retail bond issuance yet. This is going to come at a large scale. It's going to wrap in the kind of energy efficiency that the minister was talking about this morning in packages with renewables. Pension fund reform is going to be vital. If our pension fund money is going to be used to guarantee we have futures into which we can retire, then it's going to have to be redirected. And this will open up major new opportunities for green infrastructure financing and job creation. You know, with unemployment in young people running at horrific rates now, even without what happens next, we really do need the job-rich environment of green infrastructure building. And I think, finally, in closing, that, you know, world leaders often get it wrong. Iraq is the classic example of how a group of world leaders managed to create chaos based on wrong decision-making. But they can sometimes, under pressure, do impressive things. And I think what's going to happen out of these systemic risk debates, particularly the oil supply risk, is that they will be faced with a crisis, and it will happen on our watch. I hope I'm wrong, but it will happen on our watch, and there'll be a unique window of opportunity for them to replicate what they did with the financial crisis, because it could have been a lot worse. It could have been an Armageddon situation. But by working together, governments managed to head off the worst excesses. And so I think that's what is going to happen. I wish we could do these things by evolution, but my analysis tells me that we won't. We'll have to do it under pressure. So to conclude, there can be a renewables revolution. I wouldn't use the word will. These risk issues and how they play out are going to be vital to it. We need to respond to them in an effective way. Much depends on this. And my best guess is that we will do it. I'm optimistic. We'll craft a renaissance, mostly powered by renewables. Not entirely, but mostly. But things will get worse before the road to renaissance becomes clear. It's far from a guaranteed outcome. And when you look at something like this is the Bakken shale oil field. This is gas being flared in modern America. That this is allowed, that they can flare that much gas that you can see it from space, is the kind of ludicrous, suicidal decision to permit it that we have to turn around if we are indeed to fashion this renewable renaissance. So thank you very much for listening to me. Here are some of my contact points, and this is a short video that might be worth watching that summarizes some of the things I've said for you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy Leggett. You mentioned the civil war in energy markets in the UK and in Germany, but isn't that a conflict you see in other European countries and other parts of the world?
Yeah, it's a global situation. You see this, anyone who's been to the climate negotiations will see how the conventional energy industry performs, how their lobbyists perform and what they do, working very often with governments in OPEC who really want to try and stall or maybe even derail the process. It's a global problem. It's not a conspiracy, I don't think that. I think it's just it's a cultural problem. It's a problem of the human condition. But it's something we need to be aware of, it's something we need to deconstruct, and occasionally you see it break down. So for example, in BP, under Lord Brown, their CEO, 2 CEOs ago, they did accept climate change, they started investing in renewables, they did many things that were progressive and useful. All that's gone now. Under Tony Hayward and Bob Dudley, they've abandoned their pledge not to exploit the tar sands, they've retreated out of solar altogether, just as the price comes down. Why would you do that? Just as it's getting affordable, you pull out completely. And they're retrenched into the carbonization of the world and the new era of fossil fuels.
But you also have your own interests in your Solarcentury company. So should we believe everything you tell us then?
Jeremy Paxman said exactly the same thing to me on Newsnight. Yeah, you should at least accept that I'm sincere, because it's the other way around. I mean, many people say this, you just try to sell solar panels, you're a solar panel salesman, you hype all these problems. But the truth is, I set up as you can find out, I set up the solar company because of my fears about overdependence on fossil fuels.
Jeremy Leggett, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.